Damon Reeves was 36 years old the night he married Camille Okafor in a ballroom at the Marriott Riverside in Charlotte, North Carolina, watched his new wife slip out a side door 40 minutes into the reception while the band was still playing their first set. She had told the table she needed air. She had touched his arm when she said it, the way a person touches a surface they are about to leave. He watched her go and gave her 4 minutes. Then he followed. What Camille knew about Damon Reeves was that he managed supply chain operations for a size distribution company in Charlotte, that he drove a practical car and wore practical shoes, that he had grown up in a 2-bedroom house in West Charlotte raised by a grandmother who had worked the cafeteria line at Geringer High for 31 years, and that he was the kind of quiet that people sometimes confused with simple. He had never corrected that impression. He had found it useful. She did not know what he had been doing with his salary for the last 9 years. She did not know about the Wilmington property, or the one in Concord, or the LLC that held them both. She had not asked. She had looked at his car and his shoes and decided what she was looking at. In a parking garage 2 levels below the ballroom, still in her wedding dress, Camille was on the phone telling someone named Marcus that she had done it. That it was legal now. She had 3 months to find what she needed, and then they could move. That Damon would never see it coming. She had $31. 0 of his money already moved to an account he didn't know existed. What happened next was not loud. It was not fast. But it was complete in the way that only a man with 9 years of patience and 12 months of documentation can make something complete. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning of the wedding, Damon had been up before the sun. That was his habit, had been his grandmother's habit before it was his. Pearl Reeves had set her alarm for 4:45 every morning of her adult life and had never, in Damon's memory, looked like a woman who resented it. She had made his breakfast before school for 11 years without being asked and had pressed his clothes and packed his lunch and gotten herself out the door in time to unlock the cafeteria at Geringer by 6. She had told him once, when he was about 13 and asking why she worked so hard for so little, that she wasn't working for little. She was working for the space between what people thought she had and what she actually had. She had tapped her temple when she said it. Pearl had passed 3 years ago at 77. The house in West Charlotte was his now. He had renovated it room by room over 2 years, doing most of the work himself on weekends. He had laid the tile in the kitchen by hand and replumbed the bathroom and replaced every window. He had done it carefully and without rush, the way he did most things. He made coffee that morning in his apartment. He had kept the West Charlotte house as a rental, living separately, and stood at the counter in the gray pre-dawn and thought about the day the way a man thinks about a long job. He has already planned down to the sequence of steps. The ceremony was at 3. The reception at 6. He had a black suit pressed and ready. He had his grandmother's pocket watch in his jacket pocket, the one she had given him from his grandfather's effects. A small silver thing. No brand name, just a mechanism that had kept accurate time for 50 years. He had met Camille 18 months ago at a professional mixer in uptown Charlotte. She was in pharmaceutical procurement, which meant she knew how to be in a room and how to read one, and she had those skills at a level that had impressed him at the time. She was warm in the way of someone who had practiced warmth until it became second nature. She was precise about what she wanted in a way he had admired before he understood what she wanted. They had moved quickly. He had let the pace be hers. He had been watching quietly the whole time. What had made him start watching more carefully was a Thursday night 4 months into the relationship. A night he had come by her apartment unexpectedly to drop off a forgotten item and found a second set of keys on her counter that belonged to a car he had never seen. She had explained it smoothly. The explanation was too smooth. He had noted it the way his grandmother had taught him to note things that didn't. A line, not with alarm, but with the deliberate attention you give to a load-bearing element that might be hiding a crack. His other phone, the one registered to Reeves Property Holdings LLC, was locked in his glove compartment. It had been there unknown to Camille for the entirety of their relationship. He finished his coffee. He put on his grandfather's pocket watch. He drove to the venue. At the reception, the band opened with something slow, and the room was bright and full, and everyone he cared about was in it. His cousin, Walter, his old colleague, Bernard, 3 friends from the Charlotte logistics community, who had known him since his first job. He danced one dance with Camille that was real. Her dress was ivory, and she wore it beautifully, and for 40 minutes he let himself simply be in the room. Then he watched her touch his arm and say she needed air, and he watched her go, and he counted 4 minutes on his grandfather's watch. Then he followed. He found her on level 2 of the parking garage, standing between 2 cars in the amber light, her phone pressed to her ear, the train of her dress gathered in one hand. He came through the stairwell door and stopped in the shadow of a concrete column 20 feet away. She did not hear him. The garage carried her voice cleanly. He heard enough in the first 30 seconds to understand what he was listening to. He heard the name Marcus. He heard the phrase, "It's done, it's legal." He heard her say 3 months, and he heard her say he won't see it coming, and he heard the precise and practical tone of a woman who had made a plan and was reporting on its progress. He did not move. He did not make a sound. He stood in that garage for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. He knew because he checked his grandfather's watch when she ended the call, and he collected every word she said the way a man collects evidence, which is exactly what it was. When she ended the call and smoothed the front of her dress and turned toward the elevator, he was already back through the stairwell door. He was at the bar when she returned to the ballroom. He had a glass of water in his hand. He smiled when she crossed the room to him, and she smiled back and touched his lapel and said the air had helped. His face showed her nothing. His mind was already moving through the sequence. He was a supply chain manager by profession and by temperament. He understood systems, the way things moved from origin to destination, the way disruption in one part of a chain propagated through the rest, the way the only correct response to a discovered flaw was documentation followed by redesign. He did not panic when a system failed. He mapped it. He rebuilt it. He removed the compromised component. He stayed at the reception for 2 more hours. He danced a second dance. He cut the cake. He thanked the guests with the same genuine warmth he always carried, because the guests were real and deserved it. At 10:15, he helped Camille into the car they had arranged to take them to the hotel. He was pleasant and attentive for the rest of that evening. Bathroom at midnight while Camille slept, he opened his Holdings phone and sent one text to his attorney. It said, "Monday morning, early, bring everything." Renata Sims had been practicing family and civil law in Charlotte for 19 years. She was 54, economical in movement and language, and had the quality Damon had come to value above all others in a professional. She told him exactly what she thought without softening it for comfort. He had retained her 2 years ago, 3 months before he had even met Camille, when he had first transferred his second property into the LLC, and wanted someone who understood the full picture of what he was building. She knew, therefore, that the picture was considerably more complex than Camille's attorney was going to expect. Damon arrived at her office at 7:30 Monday morning. She had coffee waiting and the beginning of a legal pad already half covered. He had not slept excessively, but he had slept enough. He told her what he had heard in the parking garage. He told her about the name Marcus. He told her about the account he had identified 3 weeks prior, a discovery he had made not by accident, but through the careful review of a joint credit application Camille had filed without his knowledge, which had pulled a soft credit inquiry that had appeared in his own monitoring service as a linked account flag. He had noted it, traced it, and confirmed its existence without touching it or revealing that he knew. The account held $31. Zero Zao. It had been funded by 14 transfers from the joint checking account over the preceding 8 months, each one beneath the threshold that would have triggered an automatic notification to the other account holder. The amounts were not random. They were patterned. The spacing was deliberate. Renata set down her pen. "How long has she been planning this?" she said. "At least 11 months." Damon said, "Possibly from the beginning." Renata looked at him for a moment. "You have the transfer records? Printed and annotated." She held out her hand and he placed the folder in it. She reviewed the first 3 pages without speaking. "Marital waste," she said, "documented and patterned. That's not accidental spending, that's a structured diversion." She turned a page. "Carolina is an equitable distribution state. Marital waste is a factor in the distribution analysis." She looked up. "The LLC properties, both acquired before the marriage. Both held in the LLC since formation. No marital funds have touched either property." She'll argue constructive commingling. "Let her argue it," Damon said. "The LLC records are clean back to day one." Renata almost smiled. "The LLC's current asset value," he told her. She wrote the number without reacting. That was one of the things he liked about her. "There's also a Marcus," Damon said. "I don't have a last name yet." But the call was long enough to establish that the relationship has been ongoing, that he has knowledge of her financial plans. Renata nodded. "That speaks to the timeline of the marriage." She closed the folder. "Damon, she married you 4 days ago. Whatever she was planning, she planned it before the ink was dry, and probably before the invitations went out. She let that sit. I want to begin the documentation process immediately. I want everything we have dated and certified before she has any reason to believe you know anything." Damon looked at her steadily. "She has no reason right now. Then let's keep it that way." He went back to work. He went home to the apartment they had agreed to share during the first months of the marriage. He cooked dinner. He asked Camille about her day. He listened to her answers with the full attention he had always given her. Because the attention was real, even now, even knowing what he knew. Because paying attention had never been a performance for him. It was just how he moved through the world. He watched her check her phone twice during dinner, when she thought he was looking at his own. He noticed the particular angle at which she held the screen. He said nothing. That weekend, he drove to West Charlotte and sat on the porch of his grandmother's house. His house, with his cousin Walter, who was 51 and had known Damon his entire life, and who had been quietly skeptical of Camille from the first time he met her at a family cookout without ever saying so directly. Walter was a retired postal worker with the particular perceptiveness of a man who had spent 30 years reading the difference between what people said and what they meant. Damon told him everything. Walter listened without interrupting, which was its own form of respect. When Damon finished, Walter looked out at the street for a moment, the same street they had grown up on, the same oak tree still there at the corner, and then he said, "Your grandmother saw it," Damon said. "I know. She didn't say anything to you because she knew you had to see it yourself." Walter took a drink from his bottle. "Pearl didn't raise a man who needed to be rescued. She raised a man who needed to be given enough time to work things out." Damon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need one more thing. I need the name." Walter looked at him. "I might have a way to get it." The name came back 4 days later. Walter had a connection through a former colleague whose daughter worked in pharmaceutical procurement for a different company. A small world. Charlotte's Professional Networks. Marcus Devereaux, a regional sales director. The connection between him and Camille went back 2 years, which was 6 months before Damon had met her at that mixer. He had the name at 9:15 on a Wednesday morning. He called Renata by 9:30. Patience is the chain that holds until the weight arrives. Friday evening, Damon came home and made a meal he had been making since his grandmother taught it to him. Slow-cooked, unhurried, the kind of cooking that required you to be present without doing much. He set the table. He poured water. He sat across from his wife of 11 days and was entirely present for the meal. because that was who he was, and those things did not cancel each other out. She had no idea that Renata had, that same afternoon, completed and signed a formal documentation package ready to be filed the following Monday. She had no idea about Marcus Devereaux's name in that package. She had no idea that the LLC's properties were beyond her reach and had always been. She smiled at him across the table and said the food was wonderful. He thanked her. He asked if she wanted more. She said yes. He served her. The mediation was filed 31 days after the wedding. The speed of it was itself a message, and Renata had intended it that way. Camille had retained her own attorney, a man named Sheridan who had a reputation for aggressive asset claims. Within 48 hours of receiving the filing notice, which told Damon that she had either already been in contact with him or had reached him very quickly, neither of which surprised him. They met in a mediator's suite in a building on South Tryon Street on a Thursday afternoon. Renata had requested a forensic accountant attend as a consulting witness. The accountant, a woman named Dr. Felice Morton, sat quietly at the end of the table with a laptop and a printed report that ran to 88 pages. Damon sat beside Renata and did not speak during the opening statements. He had been told not to and had agreed without argument. He watched Sheridan present Camille's position, a claim to equitable distribution of what he described as the marital estate, including the 2 LLC properties, which Sheridan argued had appreciated in value during the marriage using Damon's marital labor and attention, therefore carried a marital interest. Renata waited until he finished. She said, "The LLC properties were acquired at the following dates." She read them. She slid the documentation across the table. They are pre-marital separate property under North Carolina General Statutes 5020. No marital funds were used for acquisition, maintenance, or improvement at any point. The LLC operating records are in the exhibit binder, tab 3. Sheridan reviewed the documents. He said the appreciation argument was still viable. Renata said, "Then Dr. Morton will walk us through the appreciation analysis." Dr. Morton walked them through it. The analysis was 61 pages. The appreciation during the marriage, 11 days of which were measurable, was negligible and attributable entirely to market conditions, to marital effort. This was documented. It was not a close question. Sheridan moved on. He raised the joint account. Renata said, "We'd like to raise the joint account as well." She nodded at Dr. Morton, who turned to tab 7. 14 transfers, 8 months, $31,000. Each one documented. Each one analyzed against Camille's stated income and known expenditure patterns. The destination account, identified through the credit monitoring flag, was in Camille's name alone. Opened 10 months before the wedding. Last funded 3 days before the ceremony. The room was quiet. Sheridan asked for a recess. Renata said they could have 15 minutes. Across the table, Camille was looking at the exhibit binder. Her expression had gone through 3 changes in the past 6 minutes, each one a degree quieter than the last. Damon watched it happen the way you watch a load calculation come back negative, not with satisfaction, exactly, but with the precise recognition of a man who built things for a living and understood what structural failure looked like when it arrived. Schedule. She looked up and found him watching her. He did not look away. He did not smile. He was not angry. He was simply present in the room, which had always been enough. She had no idea, that night in the parking garage in her wedding dress, whose arm she had been touching. The recess lasted 22 minutes. Sheridan returned and said his client wished to discuss a modified position. The modified position abandoned the LLC claim entirely. The joint account would be split, with the $31,000 diversion credited back to Damon's share. The marital waste finding would be entered into the record without contest. Renata said, "There is one additional item." Sheridan said, "What item?" Renata said, "The marriage was entered into under misrepresentation of material facts, specifically the existence of a prior ongoing relationship that predated the marriage and continued through the wedding date. North Carolina does not recognize fault divorce in financial proceedings, but this documentation affects the equitable distribution analysis and the court's discretion in applying it. She paused. We are not filing a fraud claim at this time. We are noting it in the record. For completeness. Sheridan looked at his client. Camille was looking at the table. Damon gathered his copies, stood, and buttoned his jacket. He shook Renata's hand. He nodded once to Dr. Morton. He left the room without looking back. The hallway was wide and quiet, and the afternoon light came through the windows at the south end in long, parallel bars across the floor. He walked through them without slowing. He had built the case the way he built everything, from the load-bearing, elements outward. Start with what holds, make sure it holds, then build on top of it. He drove home. 9 months passed the way long work passes, marked not by events but by the accumulation of completed things. The dissolution was finalized in February. Renata's office had handled it with the same unhurried precision with which she handled everything. The outcome was clean. The LLC properties were untouched. The joint account was equitably settled with the full credit applied. The marital waste documentation went into the public record and stayed there. Damon sold his apartment in the spring and moved back into the West Charlotte house permanently. He spent 6 weekends that year, finishing the work his grandmother had started. The back porch, which needed new decking, the garden plot along the south fence, which Pearl had always intended to expand but had never gotten to. He built the new deck boards himself, taking his time, using wood he had selected at the lumber yard on a Saturday morning, with the same attention he brought to any materials decision. He set each board level. He did not rush. Cross Logistics, his real employer, the consulting practice he had been quietly building alongside his day job for 3 years, absorbed a new client in March that brought its annual revenue past a threshold he had set for himself privately 5 years ago. He had told no one the number. He had simply worked toward it. The day it cleared, he sat in the West Charlotte kitchen, with his grandfather's watch on the table in front of him, and a cup of coffee, and let himself feel the quiet satisfaction of a thing completed correctly. Marcus Devereaux had relocated to a different region by spring, a lateral move, presented as a promotion, which was the way those situations were usually managed. Whether Camille had gone with him or not was information that had reached Damon through a mutual acquaintance and had produced in him no emotion. Worth examining, she had her life. It was no longer adjacent to his. Her attorney, Sheridan, called Renata twice in the spring on unrelated matters. Both times, Renata reported he had been unusually collegial. A woman named Jade Farrow had been attending the same early morning running group at a park 3 blocks from the West Charlotte house since April. She was a structural project manager at a firm downtown, a woman of 34 who had a particular quality Damon had noticed immediately. She asked follow-up questions, not to fill silence, because she was actually listening to the first answer. They had talked after the run 4 times in as many weeks, and the conversations had run long, in the way that conversations run long when neither person is performing interest they don't feel. She was not a plan. She was a fact in the present. He was attending to it with patience, the way his grandmother had taught him to attend to anything worth building. On a Sunday morning in October, Damon was on the new back deck before the sun was fully up, coffee in both hands, listening to the neighborhood come awake. A mockingbird was cycling through its repertoire in the oak tree at the corner. The same oak tree, the same corner, the same street it had always been, with the light different now, and the season turning and the deck level under his feet, built from good materials, set flush, built to last. He thought about Pearl Reeves and the space she had always talked about. The space between what people thought you had and what you actually had. He understood now that she hadn't only been talking about money. She had been talking about the whole interior life a person builds when they stop spending energy performing for people who haven't bothered to ask. Took a drink of coffee. He sat in that good early quiet, He was still, he was whole, he was exactly where the work had always been pointing. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.